My name is Arjan Molenaar. It's a really Dutch name. I'm from the Netherlands. I work as a software consultant currently for the German railways. Yeah, next to coding, which I also do a lot in my spare time, I like cycling and I brew some beer every now and then. So that's kind of a short introduction of myself.
I guess I can reintroduce myself as well real quick. So once again, my name is Daniel. I work for Ford Motor Company, where I help design safety into complex software-based automated and electrified technologies. And in my free time, I've been working on this application with Arjan to help model some of these complex designs. And I also like to ride bicycles. So Arjan and I need to go get together sometime.
After Corona, I suppose that will be.
Yeah.
So, in short, what are we going to talk about? First of all, if you talk about multi-platform applications, first question is, why do you want to do it? In our case, we did it. So I'd like to introduce, well, our case, basically, Gaphor, the modeling tool that Dan mentioned. Then we're going to look into some stuff related to what it takes to build stuff for Linux, for desktop users, for Windows and for macOS. And at the end, we try to kind of dense it down to a couple of takeaways. Oh, that works really nice. I don't have to touch anything. First of all, well, I don't know how many people are actually also in their spare time building software. How many people are building software in their spare time? I can't see hands. It's a bit. Can you count hands then? I saw Rick's hands. So that's at least one. So that's good. And of course, if you build something, then, well, the most rewarding is if other people use it and if they appreciate it. So that's actually what we want to. That's also what we want to achieve by putting our spare time in a piece of software. And well, if it can reach people, then it would be even better to get useful feedback from different people to actually improve the work even more, so it's more applicable to an even broader user base. Next. Our main platform is Linux for this particular application. But if you look at both the desktop market share and the market share for developers, and I think our target is somewhere in the middle, then you see that at most that covers 25% of the actual user base. So that is like 75% of your users, if you make it particularly for specifically for Linux or for macOS, would be the same. Then you're missing out on a lot of potential, a lot of people. So that is one of the things that we found that, well, we should at least pursue the possibility to support multiple platforms. So what we want to achieve by that is, well, a broader and more inclusive user base, more different people that use the application. Also, when you think about Linux and the open source mentality, it's also good to let people get acquainted with it, introduce people to open source, who are on platforms like macOS and Windows. It gives a kind of at least a sense of more future-proofness, because it's running on multiple platforms, so it should be quite reliable, right, in that sense. And also, if you're using it in your team, for example, and when I work in teams, well, I'm using Linux as my main operating system. Lots of colleagues are using macOS, and there are also a couple that are using Windows. So if you use a tool, you want to use a tool that you can use over these platforms. Otherwise, if you create something in that one tool, you leave out the rest of the team, which is, well, not really, I said it, friendly to the rest of the team. So, well, what are you targeting then? The three main platforms, of course. In the process, we try to automate as much as possible. That helps, for example, the release process. And one of the things that that's also, especially with macOS nowadays, is that you want to kind of alleviate all the warnings. If you just download a regular application on macOS, the operating starts screaming that it's dangerous and risky and everything. So you want to not scare people away. That's basically the point. So a little bit about Gaphor and how I take my notes. It's a modeling tool, like Dan said. It's written mainly in Python. It's using the GTK UI library, which is on Linux, also used for the GNOME desktop. So it's quite widely used, and it has multi-platform support actually. And I started this project kind of with the same reason, but I started it almost 20 years ago, because I thought that modeling should facilitate the creation process, and a lot of the modeling tools, especially at that time, were either well, were really complex, hard to use. Well, all you wanted was some diagrams to convey a concept. Those were really complex and also really expensive tools. So yeah, I wanted something different and started building on this. Now, how about you, Dan?
Yeah, so about 4 years ago, I started to get involved in Gaphor, and I was looking for an open source modeling tool that I could use to model these complex systems. As I mentioned before, I work at Ford Motor Company, and we use modeling to say, if you're going to design a car that parks itself, you would design how the behavior and the structure and the requirements for that system all would work together safely. And I really am passionate about like open source, and I thought, man, it would be really great to be able to help build a modeling tool that, just the typical user could start to make use of, and also something that's quick and easy to model with. So I stumbled across Gaphor, and I was immediately blown away by it because it was nice and easy to use modeling tool, and it was written in Python, and that was a lot more accessible for me because I'm not a professional software developer. And it made it really approachable for me to dive right in and look at, how the tool works. Unfortunately, Arjan had been busy with other things, so I think the tool had been kind of archived or hadn't been updated in a number of years. And so I kind of jumped right in and started trying to update things. And then Arjan eventually got back engaged with me. So it's been fun. So next, I kind of want to talk about how you set up your project for success with some of these tips that we learned the hard way as we were trying to make our tool multi-platform. So when I first picked up Gaphor, it had this docking widget called ETK docking. And it created a docking experience similar to like a complex IDE, like something like Eclipse, where you could rearrange or hide or maximize or kind of move and pop out different UI components. And this required creating some very custom GUI widgets using, and a GUI widget is like kind of the parts you build the GUI with, using an older version of GTK, GTK2, and PyGTK, which was how you developed in GTK at the time. And although it was really clever that this was implemented, we would have had to pretty much rewrite the whole thing in order to move to the new version of GTK, GTK3, as well as PyGObject, which are like the updated introspection bindings for GTK, and also Python 3. So we were like migrating from Python 2 to Python 3 and GTK2 to GTK3, and all that's all at once. And also, if you came across like a bug or issue, it's hard to get it fixed because you're kind of exploring the limits of these GUI toolkits. And so you might find some like edge case that no one's found before, and then it becomes really hard for someone to reproduce it and help get it fixed. In this example here, we were creating a new GTK widget. It was a compact button in order to do that docking. And you can see those properties that are defined with a double underscores, or also called dunders in Python. So there's one called gtype name that sets kind of the name of the widget. And also then two dictionaries that are defined, which are these are the class properties for this class. One that defines some custom signals that get emitted when GUI events happen, and also some custom properties. So this is like an example of how this custom widget was created. And what we learned kind of the hard way is, we should really try to make use of these out-of-the-box solutions because they're the ones that are really well supported. In that kind of docking widget example I just talked about, I guess the question is, do users really need this much customization in their UI components? And I think keeping things really simple and consistent and aligned with things like a human interface guideline is the way to go. So, we're talking about these graphical user interfaces, and toolkits like GTK and Qt already provide great foundation to build GUI applications. And you want to keep your GUI simple. And I would like to keep kind of the toolkit small as well. So in order to do that, you want to use these out-of-the-box widgets and other components, and also kind of keep your libraries that you're using with Python small if possible. So you can see these are some of our dependencies. This is from a pyproject.toml, which defines our dependencies for the project. So Gaphor depends on Python itself, of course, and then PyGObject is the GTK bindings, and PyCairo is how you draw on draw shapes on the screen. And then Gaphos and generic are two libraries we created for Gaphor. So they were created for this project. Gaphos is a diagramming widget that kind of builds on top of PyCairo in order to give you shapes and relationships drawn to a screen. And generic is for generic programming, which is also called multi-dispatch, which allows you to call a function or method based on the type that's being called. And finally, we just recently added Tiny CSS2 as a dependency, and that's because Arjan implemented CSS support, so you can theme the app and make it look like you want to. So you can see, like, keeping kind of those dependencies small and make sure they're well supported across the platforms is really important. The next thing is to stay true to the ecosystem you're in. So we're developing in Python, and what's great about Python is batteries are included. So you have most of what you need already to build even a very complex application. And there are tools like Cookie Cutter, for example, that help you fully create a project from scratch using kind of modern best practices. So you can use that to start your project, and make sure you're using like the latest and greatest of Python. Using these solutions that are part of kind of maybe the standard library in Python, or using these best practices like for testing and stuff like that, will be tried and true. And so it'll be much easier to develop your application using those types of things. So for Python, we do, instead of setup.py, we use like the more modern pyproject.toml to set up the project and define all the dependencies. And we also use a Python build tool specifically. We use Poetry, but there's also tools like Flit and pip tools that can be used to build your Python project. So once again, in other words, kind of set up your project based on the language you're using, and then try to design that GUI that will conform to the GUI toolkit's interface guidelines after you kind of have your project set up for the language. Packaging is such a challenging problem to solve. And so what I mean by that is putting your app in a format so that you can install it on all these platforms. So next we'll talk about, hey, how can we be successful? How can we make this happen in Windows, Linux, and macOS? So first we're going to talk about Linux. And there's kind of two main packaging formats we'll talk about. One is Flatpack and the other is an app image. So Flatpack, and it comes with a distribution platform called FlatHub, provides really a great way to distribute your application across Linux distributions. So you don't have to package it for every distribution your users might use. It's also a really great format. It sandboxes your application and can be installed by non-root users, and also has really good desktop integration. So things like that are also important for users, because maybe someone's using your app at work and they don't have root privileges and stuff like that. And one of the really great features of this for app developers is it has these things called runtimes. And they are these maintained platforms that are maintained by the Flatpack team themselves. And so you can then build on top of that platform and not have to figure out how to recompile, some free desktop or GNOME kind of platform to build on. So it already has all the dependencies you need already built, and that's really powerful. So another thing we learned on this for building Flatpaks is we face this challenge getting a reliable build script in order to package up your app for Flatpak. So Flatpak uses this thing called a manifest, and you can think of that as like a recipe on how to build your app. And it's in JSON or YAML format. And among other things, it contains all the dependencies for your app so that they can be installed so your app will work properly. And for those dependencies, it includes the download location and a hash, a SHA-256 format, checksum to make sure that the dependency that was downloaded is actually the correct one. So this helps ensure the Flatpak build is reproducible, so you get the same result each time someone tries to install it. So there is a Flatpak builder tool for Python. Unfortunately, it has pip resolve all of your project dependencies, and pip is what the tool you use to install apps from the Python packaging index or authority. So that's when you type in pip install some library, right? And it was also using source distributions, which has it recompile each library you download from scratch instead of using a wheel, which is a binary format that's already been compiled for multiple platforms. And we tried this for a while, and we even created our own Poetry manifest creation tool that we upstreamed to, and by upstream I mean contributed back to the FlatHub project. But we were having a lot of trouble getting, I guess every time we went to re-release our app with a new version, we would have issues and failures and bugs would creep up and we'd have to spend a day or two refiguring out why our Flatpack build was failing and when we were trying to release. And that's not what you want, because once again, we want to automate our build process. We've worked really hard on some new features and we want to get it to our users quickly. And we don't want to spend 2 days troubleshooting. We just want to tag a new release and then it gets built for everyone so they can make use of it. So to fix this, we ended up actually using a bash script, and that's what's shown on the screen. So what it does is it uses wheels instead of those source distributions I was talking about. So it goes out here on that first line. So pip downloads an actual wheel of our app. So this is saying we're putting in this destination locally, and then we're telling it what version of Gaphor we want. So we've already released at this point in our automation a new version to PyPI. So it's available to download on pip with pip. And then the next line is just using some bash script to list all the files that were downloaded. So Gaphor and all its dependencies. And then awk is looking at creating 2 columns out of it, the package name and the full file name. And then it goes through that and uses curl, which is a kind of a simple app to download things off the internet to get the endpoint. So this is like a JSON endpoint for PyPI. And so it calls that endpoint for each dependency and then uses JQ, which is a JSON small command line app to get the full URL to download it and the SHA-256 checksum. So we put this kind of bash script in place to just generate a manifest file for us. And since we did that using these wheels, it's been really reliable. I don't think, Arjan kind of put this in place and I don't think it's failed once. So every time we go to release, it just kind of all works, which is really great.
You should know, you do the releases.
Yeah. Yes, it's been really good. So, so another format is called app image. And this is a little bit different than Flatpack, where I mentioned we have, you go to FlatHub and download the file, and then it also looks for the dependencies, those kind of platforms it downloads as well. With app image, you deliver this app image file to your users, and they don't have to install anything else. They can pretty much double click on the file and it will run. And so this is kind of that one app, one file type of approach. It's another really great format for distributing apps. It's also universal and sandboxed with this single file executable. I guess one thing that we learned while packaging our app using app image is because there's no external dependencies, it also means you can't rely on this runtime being available. So you have to build that yourself. This creates tension because as an app developer, we want to use the latest and greatest libraries. So we want to use the latest version of Python, the latest version of our GUI toolkits, and all the other dependencies. So we can use those new features and keep our app modern and up to date and free of security vulnerabilities and stuff like that. Unfortunately, things like glibc, which is kind of the C libraries, aren't backwards compatible. So you should really then build your app in this app image format on an older distribution of Linux to maximize compatibility. So often that's like an older version of CentOS or Ubuntu long-term support LTS are commonly used to build these app images. But often they ship with versions of our GUI toolkit, GTK, that are like 3 to 5 years out of date. And so there's some tools to help with this. To spin up, for example, and you could spin up your own Docker container as well with an older version, but then you have to figure out how to get these new versions of these toolkits and libraries on these older versions of Linux. And it can be really challenging to set it up like that. So right now, actually, Gaphor has app image support, but it's only really supported on pretty new distributions of Linux. Because of those limitations, we haven't been able to get it packaged on an older version. So maybe one time at some point, maybe we'll make Gaphor's images more compatible, but right now, that's kind of been a challenge for us. And finally, the second one is on Windows. So there's a kind of platform that you can download called MSys2 that provides a familiar environment in Windows. And it's, if you're familiar with using like Git in Windows, it was built kind of like on the foundation that MSys2 provides on, it's called MingW64. So it gives you this bash command prompt, and it feels right at home if you're used to using Linux. So that's really good. And it's also the recommended way to build like a GTK app in Windows itself. And we use something called PyInstaller to package our app in Windows. Once we have it working and running, we use that to bundle our app in PyInstaller, and then we create a installer of it that you would expect in Windows. So you can double click and kind of go through the setup procedure. It was not smooth sailing though, setting this up. So Python and MSys2 has probably 100 different patches, and a patch is like a change to the normal Python sources for CPython. And that's because these patches are needed to get Python to compile in this special environment, this MingW64 environment, which uses a C compiler, GCC, instead of the normal Microsoft Visual C++. So there's all these packages or patches on top of it just to get Python to work. And because MSys2 is a niche environment, Python isn't really testing this environment. And also a lot of the other libraries that come with Python or that you would install via pip aren't really testing this as well. So what we were able to do though, is we were able to cooperate with some of these upstream projects. And I mean by that, libraries like Virtual and with PyInstaller and Poetry to help fix bugs that we found while we are trying to get our app to build and to package. And so we submitted pull requests to those projects to make it easier for the next person to be able to not face the same issues that we came up to, right? And hopefully we can eventually get some of these patches for Python sent upstream as well, so that, that Python just better supports some of these environments. Also, I would like to talk just for a minute about code signing. So after feedback from our users, and Arjan mentioned it before, scary warnings aren't very good. So someone opens your app and they get a scary warning, a lot of times they're just gonna close it back down. So for Windows, it also provides warnings like macOS. So the way to reduce those is through something called code signing. So what you have to do is actually buy a signing certificate. It's a few $100s a year, and a company is kind of certifying that you are who you say you are. And then we were able to get that certificate and then integrate it in our continuous integration pipeline, so that every time we, I guess, build a version of Gaphor or release a new version, it automatically gets signed. And here you can see this is the sign tool that comes with Windows SDK. And we call the sign tool using our certificate that we purchased. And it includes this timestamp server that goes and gets a timestamp. And then there's also a file and timestamp, the timestamp digest and file digest. We use the SHA-256 algorithm again. And there's a password, and then we actually sign our executable itself. So that's kind of how the code signing works in Windows. And then once that's done, then users will not get those scary warnings anymore. It'll say the software is signed by the author. And next, I'll pass it back to Arjan to talk about macOS.
Unmute. Yeah, so macOS is kind of the same story as on Windows, although maybe slightly easier, because macOS has a Unix operating system under the hood, or at least a Unix environment, just like Linux. To package our stuff, mainly the Python bit itself is not that hard, but it's of course all the libraries that come with the GUI library, and that makes it hard to package it. And we get our builds of the GUI libraries. We get it from a homebrew, and well, we also have this macOS trouble of signing, of course. So what it's like to package something on macOS. macOS has this single application file, quote unquote, because it's a directory, and that is the application. Normally you wouldn't see the .app extension. You would just double click it and it will run. And these applications are packaged in what they call a DMG, which is a disk image, something like an ISO file. You can think of it like that. It's a read-only image. These apps, they have a predefined structure. So that, of course, makes it easy for macOS to know what to start. There is an info.plist, which is at the top. It tells you what the executable will be. In our case, it's what's on the second line. It's the macOS-Gaphor file. And it'll give you some extra, all the extra information, like what kind of icons should be used for the files produced by this application. What is the extensions that can be opened by this application? What are MIME types that can be opened by this application? Stuff like that. All other stuff, resources, libraries, and such, are mostly dropped in a folder that's called resources, but technically you're free to put them anywhere in the application. One other interesting difference between macOS and Linux is that if you look at a library and you look at what a library needs, for example, the GTK library needs another more utility library called glib. It is referenced by an absolute path. That is something that you need to take care of when you put stuff in an app file, because that app file can be put everywhere. It can be used, put in the application folder, but it can also be put in the user's home directory somewhere. And there is tooling for that, but it's a bit of a hassle to work out. And then there is a bit of environment variables that can be used to kind of steer the locations where, in our case, GTK will be looking for fonts and other environmental information. So we started off with our own script, which was really insightful. You learn a lot about how macOS and macOS applications work. It turned out to be a bash script of more than 200 lines with output from one while loop piping into another while loop. It was it was pretty amazing what happened over there. So in the end, when PyInstaller turned out to work nicely for Windows, Dan said, shall we give it a try for macOS? How hard can it be? And actually, that proved to be relatively easy once the Windows packaging with PyInstaller was done. So we dropped our custom script and went with PyInstaller instead. And it saved us quite a bit of work, actually. Then there is the problem with the thing with signing. In order to do that, you need to have a developer subscription from Apple, and that entitles you to download a certificate. And that certificate is used to sign both the app. So first you have to sign the app, then you wrap it in the disk image, and then you need to sign the disk image again. And yeah, and then, well, that's all performed from the build pipeline, obviously. So for the takeaways, what we found is at least take each platform separately. That's what we initially did with Linux and macOS, then Windows, and changed macOS back to be more like Windows, because they are different. What worked really well is working with the upstream projects to make sure that we don't have our own forks of PyInstaller, for example. And also, putting everything in the build pipeline, it proved to be quite useful, because otherwise, if you only do the build and test, and that is, well, it's the point where you want to do a release, and you have to go to a whole lot more steps to do the actual release, then there is a big chance that something changed and something broke. Well, if you do that process basically every build, and we do that like every commit that we push, it is creating this nice list that you see on the screen, which creates developer builds for all the major platforms. And the difference is, if we put a tag on it, it's a release. That's all there is to it, basically. So that kind of brings us to the end of what we had to say on this topic. I saw a few questions in the chat. I tried to answer 2 of them already. Unfortunately, Nick asks, does Let's Encrypt work for search with signing? Unfortunately, it doesn't. Let's Encrypt works really good for websites and everything that runs on a server, but you can't sign an app for it with it yet. So
I thought about that a lot as well when I was buying that $200 certificate. But I think the main difference is that company that you're buying the certificate from is like, you have to give them your driver's license, for example, and show them who you are. And they're kind of certifying that you are who you say you are. But yeah, it would be really great if there was something like Let's Encrypt. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with that. So a lot of if you go to that HTTPS website, a lot of the certificates that are given to those websites is now through Let's Encrypt. And they have this whole pipeline where you can automatically renew your certificate, and it's really nice. But there's nothing like that right now for signing an app. But it'd be really good if there was.
And Aprek, I don't know if I pronounced it correctly. You ask, what's on your low-hanging fruit list to do on Gaphor? What do you mean by that question?
Sander, do you mean like stuff that you could help get involved in to contribute? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Let's bring up the issue list. Yeah, for me, it's 12 o'clock. Nothing that really pops to my. There are a couple of bigger things that we want to do. For example, now we have packaged our applications nicely for Windows and for macOS. However, Gaphor was built with extensibility in mind, and it was easy to extend if you just had to install it as a Python package, because you could just install another Python package alongside it. By packaging it, we lost that ability. So we want to have something like a plugin system, so people can add custom extensions to Gaphor again.
Also been working a lot on, I mentioned, say we use this for like complex system modeling. So we've been implementing the risk analysis modeling language, RAML. so we've been implementing portions of that and also improving kind of like SysML support and UML support in the tool. So some of those things are like, yeah, adding more kind of like toolbars and more functionality to the app. And yeah, there's, if you're interested in getting involved, there's lots of opportunities, and I'm sure we could find some maybe easier getting started stuff to contribute with. So
Thanks.
And then you're welcome. Then John asked, have you considered porting your app to a tablet platform? Well, thought about it a little, but getting especially a Python application running on iOS, for example, is pretty much a no-go. And putting it on Android is also, we're using GTK, so that would basically mean that we have to rewrite the complete front end in something different. So that's quite a bit of work. Any comments? Well, with a web app, you don't have to package it. It saves a lot of work, Tom. Comments on pluses, minuses for developing a multi-platform app versus web app. What you can do with a desktop app somewhat easier than with a web app, although it's also possible, is that the desktop application is really event-driven, top-down. For web apps, that is doable, but normally slightly harder because you have this communication barrier in between your browser and possibly a server. And apart from
probably
that,
also have to know some JavaScript.
yeah, and I do a lot of web apps for work, so doing a desktop app in my spare time is nice for a change.
Maybe you trade the multi-desktops for the multi-browsers. They're all a little bit different.
And nowadays, I don't have that much problems with multi-browsers anymore. It's not like in the old days, where you basically had to write it for Chrome and then write it again for Internet Explorer. So that, in my experience, that the multi-browser platform is pretty much something of the past.
So the next question, I think, Nick, you were asking about PyGObject. So that is how you use GTK with Python. So there is called an introspection library. So it allows you to, I guess, write Python and use the GTK, but like under the hood, it's really introspecting the C, because GTK is written in C. So that's kind of what PyGObject is used for.
Yeah, for GTK, they have this intermediate layer that kind of, so what they do for PyGObject, they're not rebuilding or creating some code for every object that is in GTK. They have kind of a generic approach to it. So they write, this library is used for GTK, but also a lot of other libraries that use that same GObject platform. And you don't have to write any specific wrapper code for it, because it's in package and they do some mumbo jumbo with parsing header files and creating stuff out of that. That is in the upstream libraries have some extra processing that allows language bindings, like for Python, but also for a lot of other languages, to just reuse those bindings out of the box. Does that answer your question, Nick?
Can I ask, you use GTK? Is the audio working okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Yeah, sure.
You use GTK, and I'm just not familiar with it. Is that the same one library that's used for tkinter applications, or is it that's sort of the go-to? Is that right? For what are your alternatives? Is that sort of the go-to?
GTK is used for GNOME desktop. It's kind of short for GNOME desktop, and like
Okay,
tkinter would
okay.
be the older version of that.
Okay.
Yeah, tkinter is coming from what's that language again? Tickle, TCL.
And tkinter is also built into the standard library of Python. So if you want to build a GUI app, you could use that. You normally have to like skin it so it doesn't look like really, really old. But it is kind of nice, back to like Python has batteries included. It does have a GUI framework built into Python called tkinter, which is nice. There's also WX Python, which is another GUI toolkit, and Qt is very popular, as well as we're using GTK. So there's a few different options.
I think GTK was actually the hardest to port to all these platforms.
Yep. Was there any other questions we missed?
Remarks on the talk?
Yeah, Dan and Arjan, with regards to like Gaphor, is there any kind of like resource library as far as like videos walking through? I don't do a lot of code. I apologize, but I really love Python, and I do more I'm on the server side of stuff. But I'm just curious if you had more like video links or anything like that, like walkthroughs, initializations, and stuff like that.
On like how to use the app itself, or how to like get involved in like contributing to the app?
Yeah, just usage, kind of best practices with Gaphor. I can kind of tell that you guys are talking about this or discussing this in a very structured manner, like you would do this in like a large scale environment, right? And so I'm kind of understanding, like if I was just doing this for myself, just making, a hello world kind of thing, something very simple, but I would still want to put into practice like the points of like, yes, creating a project, doing the UML, that kind of thing. Just kind of like walk through best practices kind of thing.
Is that on our to-do list?
So it's if you go to gaphor.org, there's a video. It's using sysml, which is for modeling like a system. And actually, it was a talk I gave at Michigan Python. So I'll link you back to Michigan Python YouTube, so you can go directly
that's
there
great.
as well.
That's great.
But it might give you like an idea. I think I built like a simple like automotive example using the app. And of course, I think as Xander was saying, we'd love to have more people build up videos and tutorials and stuff like that. So there's definitely probably could be more of that in the future.
Yeah, I got a quick question. My name is John. I apologize. I got here at 14 after 5, but basically, I see this is more about the distribution on a more commercial level. What I'm trying to just to get started, I haven't worked on my Windows computer for quite a few years. So I'm trying to put some apps on my sister's computer remotely, and she's running a Windows system. So I'm going from Mac to Windows. And basically, if I'm just going to, I can like, remotely get into her computer and download everything and put them in folders and on that side of things. I'm not doing installation that's automated, with she's the admin, I'm the admin, so it's not a problem. So basically, what to make it run on Windows, I think on a programming level, basically I would have to go from using forward slashes to backslashes. You have to change all that for all the paths. Is that true? And what other things should I, look out for gotchas when I'm going from Mac to Windows?
Yeah, well, the main catch here is indeed the forward and backward slashes. So don't use those. And in Python, there is this nice library called pathlib, and that will solve that for you.
Path what?
It's called pathlib.
Okay. PATHLIP.
Yeah, Dan put it in the chat. Yeah,
Pathlib.
and that's the one you want to go for.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot. I mean, I do try to use, not direct paths, just, just branching off of certain areas. Okay.
Okay.
That's all it takes to basically to get it to work from Mac to, Windows.
Yeah, that should solve the hassle.
That's what I
Yeah,
figured.
Python's actually really good. The library is already kind of set up so that your app will work everywhere. It just mostly comes down to like, yeah, how do you package your app and make sure you're using libraries that really are multi-platform. But all the stuff that like ships with Python is all already kind of set up for that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I'm going to put it in like a virtual environment on her system and my system, and just easy to just copy it, just a brute force copy is what I'm planning on. Not any distribution. I have worked in distribution software in the past when working with commercial software, but this is just an easy thing. Although I'm rusty with Windows. I used to be a Windows guy, and then went to Mac, and I haven't switched back much. But it's great because that's why I got into Python, because I'll be doing some Linux also. So it's great to see it a multi-platform.
Okay.
I think, Chris, you were also asking about a comparison of different GUI packages. I'm not sure about that. I guess, Arjan, do you know of any like comparisons? I know Talk Python talks about GUI packages a lot, like the podcast, but
yeah, but they are mainly on the Qt bandwagon.
yeah. So I'm not sure if I know of a specific resource for that, Chris, but yeah.
I haven't checked. Maybe there is something on Wikipedia on that. They do lots of lists over there. Apart from that, I really don't know. I started off by using GTK because I thought if tools like GIMP, which is an open source drawing tool, is built with it, then I should definitely be able to build something with it. So